On December 6, 1941, Lieutenant Zenji Abe stood aboard the fleet carrier Akagi in the frigid waters of Kagoshima Bay, located in the Kuriil Islands chain. Inside his flight jacket, he carried items reflecting traditional Japanese military customs, a farewell message to his family, and a small cutting of hair intended for funeral rites. The temperature hovered near freezing as Pacific winds swept across the carrier's flight deck. Within one day, Abe and his fellow aviators would participate in Operation AI, the Japanese designation for the surprise assault on the United States Pacific Fleet anchored at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The attack represented neither Japan's preference nor its first strategic choice. Declassified Imperial Japanese Navy documents reveal that military planners understood the tremendous risks inherent in attacking American territory. What transformed this theoretical operation into actual policy was economic strangulation implemented by Western powers during 1941. If you appreciate documentary content based on primary sources and military records, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment indicating where you're watching from. We'd like to know our audience's geographic distribution. The specific catalyst occurred in July 1941 when President Franklin Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8832, freezing all Japanese financial assets held in United States institutions. This action came in direct response to Japan's military occupation of French Indochina, completed that same month. Britain and the Dutch government in exile immediately implemented parallel sanctions. The economic impact was immediate and severe. Japan imported approximately 80% of its petroleum requirements, with the majority sourced from American wells or transported through American-controlled shipping routes. Military planners in Tokyo calculated that existing strategic reserves would sustain the empire for 18 months during peacetime operations. Should full-scale war commence, that timeline contracted to less than 12 months. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, serving as Commander-in-Chief of the combined fleet since August 1939, possessed unusual qualifications for assessing American capabilities. Between 1919 and 1921, he studied at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. From 1926 to 1928, he served as a naval attaché at the Japanese Embassy in Washington, D.C. During these American postings, Yamamoto observed industrial facilities firsthand, traveled extensively across the continental United States, and developed professional relationships with American naval officers. These experiences shaped his strategic assessments. In January 1941, approximately 11 months before the Pearl Harbor operation, Yamamoto composed a memorandum to senior government officials. The document, preserved in Japanese naval archives, outlined his strategic evaluation. The text stated that defeating the United States would require occupying not merely Pacific territories such as Guam, the Philippines, or the Hawaiian Islands, but would necessitate an invasion of the American mainland, culminating in armistice negotiations conducted in Washington, D.C. itself. Yamamoto concluded this assessment with a rhetorical question regarding whether civilian leadership possessed confidence in achieving such an outcome. Available evidence indicates he believed they did not, yet military culture and hierarchical obligations required him to develop operational plans regardless of his personal strategic doubts. The plan Yamamoto authored reflected both audacity and desperation in equal measure. The concept called for concentrating Japan's carrier striking force, representing virtually the entire frontline naval aviation capability, for a single overwhelming attack on the Pacific Fleet's primary anchorage. The operational objectives were threefold. First, inflict maximum damage on American capital ships, particularly battleships. Second, achieve psychological shock through surprise attack on American territory. Third, secure approximately 6 months, during which Japanese forces could seize resource-rich territories in Southeast Asia, particularly the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies, before American industrial mobilization reached full capacity. This represented gambling strategy, and Yamamoto, who was known to enjoy card games and had studied probability theory, understood the odds. The plan assumed American public opinion would favor negotiated settlement after initial defeat, rather than prolonged conflict. This assumption would prove catastrophically incorrect. On November 26, 1941, The task force designated Kido Butai, or First Air Fleet, departed from Hitokapu Bay under strict radio silence protocols. The force commander was Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, a surface warfare officer with limited aviation experience, a personnel decision that would have significant consequences. The carrier striking force consisted of 6 fleet carriers, Akagi and Kaga, both converted from battlecruiser hulls and commissioned in the late 1920s. Soryu and Hiryu, purpose-built carriers completed in the late 1930s, and Shokaku and Zuikaku, the newest and largest carriers in Japanese service, commissioned earlier in 1941. These 6 ships embarked a total of 414 aircraft, Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters, Nakajima B5N Kate torpedo bombers, and Aichi D3A Val dive bombers. Supporting elements included 2 battleships, Hiei and Kirishima, 2 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, 9 destroyers, and 3 fleet submarines. 8 additional tankers accompanied the force to enable the extended deployment. The route selected traversed the North Pacific, deliberately chosen for its harsh weather conditions and absence of commercial shipping lanes. American naval intelligence maintained no routine surveillance of this region during winter months, as weather patterns made air reconnaissance impractical and surface patrols encountered severe sea conditions. For 13 days, the task force maintained complete radio silence, while steaming east-southeast at economical cruising speed to conserve fuel. Crews conducted final training exercises on the transit, including practice torpedo runs and dive bombing attacks against towed targets. Navigation was accomplished through dead reckoning and celestial navigation, with radio direction finding equipment kept inactive to prevent signal detection. The task force encountered multiple severe storms, with seas reaching 30 feet and wind speeds exceeding 50 knots. Several smaller escorts reported minor damage, but the carriers themselves, displacing between 25,000 and 32,000 tons, handled the rough seas adequately. At 0600 hours on December 7, 1941, the task force reached its predetermined launch position approximately 230 nautical miles north of Oahu's northern coastline. This distance represented a careful calculation, far enough to reduce detection probability, yet close enough to remain within the operational radius of carrier aircraft while allowing recovery of damaged planes. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, designated as overall airstrike coordinator, led the first wave aircraft off Akagi's deck as dawn broke across the Pacific. Fuchida, age 38, had joined the Imperial Japanese Navy in 1924 and specialized in horizontal bombing tactics. His selection as strike leader reflected both operational experience and his development of the tactical plans used in the attack. The training program for Operation AI commenced in September 1941, approximately 3 months before execution. The primary training site was Kagoshima Bay on the southern coast of Kyushu, selected because its topographical features resembled Pearl Harbor. The bay included shallow approaches, a relatively confined harbor area, and terrain features that approximated Oahu's geography. Torpedo bomber crews faced particular technical challenges. Pearl Harbor's average depth measured approximately 45 feet, significantly shallower than the conventional minimum for aerial torpedo attacks. Standard Japanese Type 91 aerial torpedoes required modification to function in shallow water. Naval engineers developed wooden fins and breakaway nose assemblies that allowed the weapons to enter the water at steep angles while minimizing diving depth. Pilots practiced release techniques at extremely low altitude, frequently below 50 feet, to achieve the precise attack geometry required. Dive bomber crews trained to deliver their weapons from steep angles approaching 70 degrees, practicing against mock targets representing different ship classes. Fighter pilots rehearsed both air superiority tactics and strafing runs against ground targets. The training regimen emphasized coordination between different aircraft types, navigation in formation over water, and rapid execution upon reaching the target area. Personnel security was maintained through compartmentalization. Pilots knew they were preparing for a major operation, but were not briefed on the actual target until after the task force departed Hitokapu Bay. Flight crews were quarantined from regular fleet personnel, and training areas were declared restricted zones with increased security patrols. Among the aviators was Keiichi Harada, flying from the carrier Soryu. Harada, aged 26, had entered naval aviation in 1938 and accumulated approximately 800 flight hours, considered moderate experience by 1941 standards. Before deployment, he arranged for his pregnant wife to relocate to her family's residence, following customary practice during military deployments. Japanese military culture emphasized stoic acceptance of duty. Emotional farewells were considered inappropriate demonstrations of weakness. At U-740 hours, Commander Fuchida's formation, 183 aircraft comprising 49 level bombers, 40 torpedo bombers, 51 dive bombers, and 43 fighters, reached their initial point north of Oahu. Visibility was excellent, with scattered clouds at 3,000 feet and unlimited horizontal visibility. Below, Pearl Harbor was clearly visible. Intelligence reports had accurately predicted the anchorage configuration. 8 battleships were present: USS Arizona, Nevada, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, California, Maryland, and West Virginia. The battleships were moored along Battleship Row on the southeast side of Ford Island, with some in paired configurations sharing mooring berths. Additional vessels included cruisers, destroyers, auxiliaries, and submarines, totaling approximately 90 vessels present in the harbor. However, intelligence had failed regarding one critical factor. The carrier USS Enterprise was at sea, having departed December 5th to deliver Marine Corps fighter aircraft to Wake Island. The carrier USS Lexington had departed December 5th on a similar mission to Midway Atoll. The carrier USS Saratoga was conducting maintenance at Naval Base San Diego on the Pacific coast. The absence of carriers represented both operational fortune and strategic failure. Fortune in avoiding detection and interception, failure in missing the highest value targets. Fuchida transmitted the attack signal at 0753 hours, 222, an abbreviation of Totsugeki meaning charge. This was followed by the code phrase Tora, 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 Tiger, 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 indicating complete tactical surprise had been achieved. The message was received at the Japanese embassy in Washington and by Admiral Yamamoto aboard his flagship in Japan's home waters. The attack sequence unfolded according to plan. Torpedo bombers approached from both sides of Ford Island, releasing weapons at altitudes between 40 and 60 feet. Level bombers at higher altitude targeted ships with armor-piercing bombs converted from 16-inch naval artillery shells. Dive bombers concentrated on cruisers and destroyers. Fighter aircraft strafed aircraft parked at Wheeler Field, Hickam Field, and Kaneohe Naval Air Station. USS Arizona suffered a catastrophic magazine explosion at approximately 0806 hours when a modified 16-inch shell penetrated the forward magazine. The explosion was recorded by Japanese aircraft cameras and killed 1,177 personnel instantly, nearly half of total American fatalities for the entire attack. USS Oklahoma capsized after suffering at least 5 torpedo hits, trapping over 400 personnel inside the hull. USS California settled in shallow water after sustaining 2 torpedo hits and 1 bomb hit. USS West Virginia sank at her mooring after multiple torpedo impacts, but remained upright due to counter-flooding measures. The second wave, led by Lieutenant Commander Shigekazu Shimazaki and comprising 167 aircraft, arrived at approximately 0840 hours. This wave encountered stronger defensive response as anti-aircraft batteries came online and encountered smoke-obscuring targets. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, flying an Aichi D-3A dive bomber from the carrier Akagi during this second wave, later recorded in his memoirs, published in Japanese in 1958, that visibility was severely degraded by smoke and defensive fire was significantly heavier than the first wave encountered. The attack concluded at approximately 0945 hours when the last Japanese aircraft departed Oahu's airspace. Attack aircraft returned to their carriers in streams, with the task force recovering aircraft throughout the late morning and early afternoon. Final accounting revealed Japanese losses of 29 aircraft, 9 fighters, 15 dive bombers, 5 torpedo bombers, and 5 midget submarines. Personnel losses totaled 64 aviators and submariners killed in action. American casualties were severe. Official Navy Department figures recorded 2,403 personnel killed and 1,178 wounded. The Army reported additional casualties among ground personnel. Material losses included 8 battleships damaged or sunk, though all, but Arizona and Oklahoma would eventually return to service. 3 cruisers damaged, 3 destroyers heavily damaged, and 188 aircraft destroyed. By conventional military metrics, the attack represented a significant tactical victory. Japanese forces achieved complete surprise, executed a complex operation across 4,000 miles of ocean without detection, delivered overwhelming force against unprepared defenses, and withdrew without suffering major losses. However, strategic assessment revealed critical omissions. Vice Admiral Nagumo declined to authorize a third attack wave, despite requests from Commander Fuchida and other air group commanders. The proposed third wave would have targeted harbor infrastructure, fuel storage facilities containing 4.5 million barrels of petroleum products, maintenance workshops and machine shops, the submarine base, and dry dock facilities. These targets represented long-term strategic value exceeding individual warships. The fuel storage tanks, if destroyed, would have forced the Pacific Fleet to operate from West Coast bases 2,000 miles farther east, severely constraining operational radius. The dry docks and repair facilities, if eliminated, would have prevented rapid salvage and reconstruction of damaged vessels. The submarine base facilities supported the submarine force that would later devastate Japanese merchant shipping. Nagumo's decision reflected tactical prudence but strategic short-sightedness. His task force was exposed, operating within range of land-based aircraft, and had lost the element of surprise. The location of American carriers remained unknown. They could appear at any moment. Fuel zhongguang for the task force was adequate, but not comfortable after the extended deployment. Weather was deteriorating. These factors, individually valid, combined to produce a decision that preserved tactical forces while failing to achieve strategic objectives. Additional factors influenced Nagumo's decision-making. As a surface warfare specialist, he may have overvalued battleship destruction while undervaluing infrastructure targets. Japanese naval doctrine emphasized decisive battle between battleship fleets. Carriers were considered supporting elements rather than primary striking forces. This doctrinal framework shaped target prioritization. The strategic context that Japanese planners failed to adequately assess was American industrial capacity. While Japan possessed qualitative superiority in several military technologies during 1941, particularly naval aviation and torpedo design, quantitative factors would determine the war's outcome. In 1941, Japanese aircraft manufacturers produced 5,088 military aircraft across all types. During this same period, American manufacturers produced 19,133 military aircraft. This nearly 4.1 ratio existed before America entered the war and before full mobilization commenced. The disparity expanded dramatically once war production shifted to maximum capacity. In 1942, Japanese production reached 8,161 aircraft, while American production reached 47,136 aircraft, a ratio approaching 5.41. By 1943, Japan produced 16,693 aircraft, while America produced 85,198 aircraft, a ratio exceeding 5.1. In 1944, peak American production reached 96,218 aircraft, compared to Japanese production of 28,180 aircraft, a ratio of 3.4.1, though absolute numerical superiority was overwhelming. These figures represented different industrial philosophies. Japanese production emphasized craftsmanship, with skilled workers building aircraft through semi-artisanal methods. Quality control was high, but production rates remained limited. American production emphasized standardization, interchangeable parts, and mass production techniques pioneered in the automotive industry. The Ford Motor Company's Willow Run facility near Detroit exemplified American industrial methodology. The plant, constructed specifically for bomber production, occupied 3.5 million square feet under a single roof. Production lines stretched over a mile in length. At peak efficiency in 1944, The facility completed one B-24 Liberator heavy bomber every 63 minutes. Each aircraft contained approximately 1,550,000 individual parts. Total production from Willow Run alone reached 8,685 aircraft between 1942 and 1945. Boeing's production facilities in Seattle, Wichita, and Renton produced 12,631 B-17 Flying Fortress bombers. Consolidated Vultee produced an additional 80,482 B-24 Liberators beyond Ford's contribution. North American Aviation produced 15,586 B-25 Mitchell medium bombers. Douglas Aircraft produced 10,126 A-20 Havoc attack bombers and 5,136 SBD Dauntless dive bombers. Grumman Aircraft produced 12,275 F-6F Hellcat fighters, the primary carrier-based fighter that would dominate Pacific air combat after 1943. This production occurred while simultaneously manufacturing transport aircraft, 23,000 C-47 Skytrains alone, training aircraft, observation aircraft, and other categories. The scale reflected conversion of entire sectors of the economy. Automobile plants, furniture manufacturers, and appliance factories retooled for military production. The workforce expanded to include millions of women in manufacturing roles previously restricted to men. Naval construction demonstrated similar disparity. In 1942, following the Battle of Midway, where Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, the Imperial Japanese Navy operated 6 fleet carriers: Shokaku, Zuikaku, Junyo, Hiyo, Ryujo, and Zuiho. Japan would never again operate more than 6 fleet carriers simultaneously. The United States Navy commissioned USS Essex, the lead ship of a new class, in December 1942. The Essex class represented standardized mass production applied to capital ships. 24 Essex-class carriers were completed between 1942 and 1950, with 17 completing during World War II. These vessels displaced 27,100 tons, operated air groups of 90-100 aircraft, and incorporated damage control features reflecting lessons from early war operations. Beyond Essex-class fleet carriers, the United States commissioned 9 Independence-class light carriers, converted from cruiser hulls, over 100 escort carriers, converted from merchant ship designs, and hundreds of destroyers, destroyer escorts, submarines, and auxiliary vessels. American shipyards launched 3 Liberty-class cargo ships every 2 days at peak production in 1943. The Liberty ship Robert E. Peary was constructed in 4 days and 15 hours during November 1942 as a demonstration of shipbuilding efficiency, though typical construction time was approximately 42 days. In the first 4 months of 1943, American shipyards delivered more merchant shipping tonnage than Japan had constructed during 7 years of pre-war expansion, 1935-1941. This production occurred while simultaneously building warships, landing craft, and other naval vessels. Japanese shipbuilding could not match this pace. Material shortages, particularly steel and specialized alloys, constrained production. Shipyard capacity remained limited, with only a handful of facilities capable of constructing large warships. American submarine warfare devastated merchant shipping faster than replacements could be built. By 1944, Japanese merchant marine tonnage was declining despite construction efforts. The strategic implication was profound. American forces could absorb losses and continue operations. Japanese forces could not. Every carrier, cruiser, or destroyer lost represented irreplaceable capability. Experienced pilots killed could not be replaced with equivalently trained personnel. Aircraft destroyed could not be replaced at equal rates. The attrition became evident during major operations. At the Battle of Midway in June 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese mobile force lost 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, to American dive bombers from USS Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet. Approximately 248 Japanese aircraft were lost along with many experienced aircrew. The loss of 4 carriers and their air groups permanently shifted the naval balance. By June 1944, during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the disparity was undeniable. The United States Navy assembled Task Force 58, comprising 15 fleet and light carriers, operating approximately 900 aircraft. The Japanese mobile fleet could muster 9 carriers, 5 fleet carriers, 4 light carriers, operating approximately 430 aircraft. American pilot training averaged 600 hours before combat assignment. Japanese pilot training had been reduced to 200 hours due to fuel shortages and accelerated replacement needs. The engagement, occurring June 19 to 20, 1944, resulted in catastrophic Japanese losses. The action became known colloquially as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot due to the one-sided nature of aerial combat. Japanese losses exceeded 600 aircraft. Accounts vary between 550 and 645, depending on classification methodology, while American losses totaled 123 aircraft, most lost to operational factors rather than combat. Additionally, 2 Japanese carriers, Taiho and Shokaku, were sunk by American submarines. The quality of Japanese replacement pilots had deteriorated significantly. Pre-war training programs produced aviators with 700-800 flight hours before combat assignment. By 1944, training hours had been reduced to 200 to 300 hours due to fuel shortages and accelerated curriculum. Inexperienced pilots operating in outdated aircraft against numerically superior and better trained opponents faced predictable outcomes. Contemporary Japanese records reflect confusion among surviving aviators. Diary entries and letters, later collected by Japanese historians, repeatedly expressed incomprehension regarding American numerical superiority. One frequently cited passage from a fighter pilot aboard Zuikaku stated, "Where do all these aircraft come from? We shoot them down and immediately more appear. The sky fills with enemy planes." By 1944, Japan's strategic situation had become untenable due to resource depletion. The oil embargo that precipitated war, designed to halt Japanese expansion, had achieved its objective through different means. American submarine warfare severed supply lines connecting Japan to resource-producing regions. United States Navy submarines, operating under modified rules of engagement that authorized unrestricted warfare against merchant vessels, systematically destroyed Japan's merchant fleet. In 1942, submarines sank 180 Japanese merchant ships, totaling 725,000 tons. In 1943, sinkings increased to 284 ships totaling 1,341,000 tons. In 1944 peak efficiency year, submarines sank 492 ships totaling 2,289,000 tons. By 1945, targets had become scarce as the merchant fleet had been largely eliminated. Tanker losses were particularly significant. In 1941, Japan operated 49 tankers totaling 587,000 gross tons. By the end of 1944, 36 tankers had been sunk and only 19 remained operational. Without tanker capacity, even captured oil fields in the Dutch East Indies provided minimal benefit as petroleum products could not be transported to Japan or forward bases. Naval operations became constrained by fuel availability. The battleship Yamato's final mission in April 1945, a one-way sortie toward Okinawa, was fueled only after transferring fuel from other vessels, as insufficient stocks existed for a return voyage. The ship never reached its destination, sunk by carrier aircraft from Task Force 58. Fleet exercises and training were curtailed or eliminated. Replacement pilots received minimal flight time before assignment to operational units. Aircraft were dispersed to prevent destruction, but could not be operated due to fuel shortages. By mid-1945, Japan possessed approximately 10,000 aircraft in reserve for homeland defense operations, but inadequate fuel existed to operate them beyond short-range interception missions. The strategic calculus that justified Pearl Harbor, seize resources, create defensive perimeter, negotiate from strength, had failed at every stage. Resources were seized but could not be transported. The defensive perimeter was penetrated. Negotiation from strength became impossible once industrial disparity became apparent. By 1945, American strategic bombing reached Japan's home islands. Boeing B-29 Super Fortress bombers, operating from bases in the Mariana Islands captured in 1944, conducted systematic attacks against industrial and urban targets. The B-29 represented technological superiority. The aircraft's pressurized cabin allowed high-altitude operations beyond the effective ceiling of most interceptors. Range exceeded 3,000 miles, allowing round-trip missions from the Marianas to Japan. Bomb load approached 20,000 pounds under maximum configuration. Defensive armament included 12 50-caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon, all remotely controlled through an advanced fire control system. Initial high-altitude precision bombing campaigns against industrial targets achieved limited results due to weather, jet stream winds, and technical difficulties. In March 1945, bombing strategy shifted to low-altitude incendiary attacks against urban areas. Japanese cities with densely packed wooden structures proved highly vulnerable to incendiary weapons. The attack on Tokyo during the night of March 9-10, 1945, conducted by 334 B-29s carrying incendiary bombs, created a firestorm that destroyed approximately 16 square miles of urban area and killed an estimated 100,000 civilians, higher casualties than either atomic bombing. Similar attacks followed against Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and other cities. By August 1945, urban areas had been systematically destroyed, industrial production severely degraded, and civilian population displaced. As conventional defensive capabilities collapsed, Japanese naval aviation adopted suicide tactics. The organized kamikaze program commenced in October 1944 during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The concept emerged from desperation rather than cultural preference, though propaganda emphasized traditional values to justify the tactic. Kamikaze tactics reflected simple mathematical logic. Inexperienced pilots with minimal training and outdated aircraft had minimal probability of surviving combat while achieving military objectives. Converting the aircraft itself into a guided weapon increased hit probability, while accepting certain pilot loss. From a purely military efficiency perspective, one where human life was treated as an expendable resource, the tactic possessed internal logic. Approximately 3,800 kamikaze pilots died during operations between October 1944 and August 1945. These attacks sank approximately 50 Allied vessels, most smaller ships such as destroyers and destroyer escorts, and damaged approximately 350 additional vessels. However, no major warships, battleships, or fleet carriers were sunk solely by kamikaze attack. Damage control procedures and medical care prevented most attacks from achieving decisive results. The psychological impact on Allied personnel was significant, but strategically the tactic failed to alter the war's trajectory. American forces adapted through increased fighter patrols, improved radar picket arrangements, and enhanced anti-aircraft defenses. By mid-1945, kamikaze effectiveness had declined as countermeasures improved and available aircraft diminished. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay dropped a uranium-based atomic weapon on Hiroshima. The weapon, designated Little Boy, yielded approximately 15 kilotons of explosive force. Casualties numbered between 70,000 and 80,000 immediate deaths, with total deaths eventually exceeding 140,000 hours, including radiation effects and subsequent injuries. On August 9, 1945, a B-29 bomber named Boxcar dropped a plutonium-based atomic weapon on Nagasaki. The weapon, designated Fat Man, yielded approximately 21 kilotons. These weapons represented technological capability Japan could not match. The Manhattan Project had cost approximately $2 billion, equivalent to approximately $30 billion in current value, and employed over 130,000 personnel at its peak. Industrial capacity, scientific expertise, and resource availability required for such development existed only in the United States during the war years. However, Japan was already defeated before atomic weapons deployment. By August 1945, the Japanese economy had collapsed. Naval forces were incapable of operations, merchant marine was effectively destroyed, and conventional strategic bombing had devastated urban and industrial areas. The atomic weapons accelerated surrender, but did not fundamentally alter Japan's strategic position, which was already untenable. Final accounting of war production illustrates the industrial disparity that determined the conflict's outcome. During the period 1941-1945, the United States produced 297,000 aircraft, all types, 86,933 tanks, 193,000 artillery pieces, 311 trucks and lorries, 6,771 naval vessels, all types excluding small craft, Japanese production during the same period, 76,320 aircraft, all types, 6,300 tanks approximately, 13,000 artillery pieces approximately, unknown quantity of trucks estimated below 200,000, 950 naval vessels, all types excluding small craft. The ratios reveal the fundamental strategic imbalance. American aircraft production exceeded Japanese production by nearly 4.1. Tank production exceeded Japanese production by approximately 13.1. Artillery production exceeded Japanese production by nearly 15.1. These figures demonstrate that industrial capacity, not tactical skill or individual courage, determined the Pacific War's outcome. Japanese forces fought with competence and, frequently, with fanatical determination. These qualities proved insufficient against overwhelming material superiority. Admiral Yamamoto's prediction, 6 months of success followed by inevitable defeat, proved accurate. Japanese forces achieved objectives in the Philippines, Dutch East Indies, Malaya, and Burma during the first 6 months of war. From June 1942 onward, Japan fought defensive campaigns with declining resources against an opponent whose capabilities continuously expanded. Yamamoto himself did not survive to witness the full scope of defeat. On April 18, 1943, American intelligence agencies intercepted and decoded Japanese naval communications, indicating Yamamoto's inspection tour schedule. 16 Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighters, operating at extreme range from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, intercepted and shot down his transport aircraft over Bougainville Island. Yamamoto died in the crash. Lieutenant Zenji Abe survived the war. Records indicate he returned to civilian life and lived until 1993, though detailed biographical information remains limited. Like many Pearl Harbor participants, he provided interviews and written accounts to Japanese historians researching the operation. His reflections and those of other survivors consistently acknowledged that Pearl Harbor represented strategic failure despite tactical success. The surprise was achieved, ships were sunk, casualties were inflicted, but the operation failed to accomplish its intended strategic purpose, forcing the United States to negotiate rather than mobilize for total war. Japanese participants understood in hindsight that they had underestimated American resolve. Cultural assumptions that Americans were soft, decadent, individualistic, and lacked martial spirit proved catastrophically wrong. American forces demonstrated sustained determination throughout 4 years of warfare, across vast distances under harsh conditions. The Pearl Harbor attack, rather than intimidating the United States into negotiated settlement, unified American public opinion. On December 8, 1941, Congress declared war with only one dissenting vote. Public opinion polls showed over 90% approval for war declaration. Industrial mobilization commenced immediately. Military enlistment exceeded requirements. From the Japanese perspective, these responses validated Yamamoto's warnings that attacking America would unleash forces beyond Japan's capacity to defeat. The question that troubled Lieutenant Abe on December 6, 1941, whether Americans were truly as weak as claimed, received definitive answer. The phrase attributed to Yamamoto, "I fear all we have done is awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with terrible resolve," appears in no contemporary document and likely represents post-war embellishment. However, it accurately summarizes the strategic outcome. Japan awakened American industrial power and military potential that had previously remained partially mobilized. Pearl Harbor was not a victory. It was the opening phase of Japan's defeat. The ships sunk were mostly raised and repaired. The personnel killed were replaced many times over. The facilities left intact enabled rapid reconstruction. The carriers that escaped continued operating and were joined by dozens more. The industrial base targeted remained intact and expanded to unprecedented scale. Within 4 years, Japan's military was destroyed. its empire dismantled, its cities burned, and its government forced to unconditional surrender. This outcome was inevitable once industrial disparity became operational. Courage, skill, and tactical excellence could not overcome quantitative material superiority measured in ratios of 4.1, 10.1 or greater. When Japan attacked the United States Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, it didn't merely attack a navy. It initiated a conflict against an industrial system unmatched in human history. That industrial system, relentless, efficient, and operating at continental scale, buried Japan in steel, in fire, and in history.